Neighbor is trying to use the county and police to enforce their HOA. I recently purchased a vacant piece of 20 acres in a rural county. A 5-acre subdivision with HOA restrictive covenants borders my property. I am not in the HOA. The access for my property is through a deeded public county road that goes through the HOA neighborhood. As soon as I bought my property, I went out to take the sign down. The president of the HOA came down to ask me what I was doing there, and what my plans are for the property. I was polite and friendly. He told me about their HOA and told me that I was required to submit any plans I had for the property to him before I could build or do anything. I politely let him know that I was not in the HOA but had intentions of being neighborly. Over the course of 6 months, he would call me any time we visited the property, and 2 days later, we would get a letter from the county about a nuisance complaint. I eventually asked him to stop calling me and let him know my private property was my private business and that I would not be calling him every time I visited or used my land. The complaints to the county escalated. Every time I went to my property, I could be sure there would be a complaint that I was committing some infraction that I was not. I met with the county zoning and building enforcement officers. I explained to them what was happening. I showed them that I was not committing the violations I was being accused of, and I expressed my frustration with having to explain myself and deal with these complaints every time I used my property. They agreed and assured me that I was within compliance and not to worry. The HOA has escalated again. First off, calling and emailing every person with a county email address to deliver false complaints, contacting every state and county organization from air quality control to Division of Wildlife to the tax assessor, trying to find any and all regulations that I may or may not be in violation of. And then they were blocking the road and my access to my property physically with their vehicles and firearms. I had to wait on my property until the police arrived to remove them before I could leave. They were video surveilling me, my property, and my visitors any time that we visited the property, and they've gone to 2 county commission meetings now and blatantly lied and slandered me to the county commission during public comment. They've tried to start the process to vacate the road to my property. Throughout the process, I have communicated with the county and maintained a good relationship and ensured that I was in compliance. One of the county commissioners told me, "This is not about a specific violation, this is about the HOA attempting to exercise control over your property that they do not have and reaching for any straw that they can find when one attempt is unfruitful." I'm not sure what to do or how to make it stop. I generally just ignore them, but on the advice of police, I serve the neighbors with notice of trespass and a letter to cease and desist the ongoing stalking and harassment. This was to no avail. At this point, I feel like there has been blatant defamation, false light, and intentional affliction of emotional distress, but I don't know that I've been damaged other than my time and effort to deal with their frivolous complaints. What options do I have to make it stop? Do you agree? Good Lord, this definitely needs to be handled by a competent attorney or attorneys in your jurisdiction, like 2 months ago. There's so much to untangle here, and there are likely complaints to bodies that you're unaware of. At the very least, keep a detailed record of every interaction that you've had with them in some kind of journal and logbook that details the police being called out. Certainly get a report or case number from the officers, any text messages, voicemails, or emails, and so on before calling attorneys in your area. If you're concerned about the HOA having influence over your local law offices, if you live in a small town, then look up one in your state's capital. I mean, if they're blocking you from the property with the guns and the firearms and vehicles, and it's all done illegally and they're using cops against you, you gotta lawyer up. What would you do? Entitled HOA Karen Storytime in, D-Bag tries to enforce his own community rules while ignoring the already established ones, posted by Higure 2. I live in a private community in Mexico with around 50 houses, and we have something similar to an American HOA, but this one is not legal and it doesn't impose fines. It collects monthly fees to pay gardeners and security. It also proposes community rules which are approved by the majority of the residents and are followed by almost all of them. Second, I have a duplex house. I live in the lower floor and I rent the upper one. 2 years ago, I had a tenant who got into a fight with all the neighbors about the constant parties she threw. They tried to call the police several times, but she never did anything illegal, never exceeded the maximum number of occupants under COVID restrictions, and never exceeded the noise allowed, and also followed the HOA rules by ending parties or leaving with her guest by around 2300 hours. The HOA was ticked, and the president, which I'll call D-Bag, was so angry, he decided to completely ignore all the rules and laws, skip the process to change the HOA rules, and just decided to dispose the tenant of her security service, which is opening and closing the entrance to the private community for her and her visits, until she stopped the parties, which she did since she didn't want to sue the HOA for only 1 month left in her contract. After this, I hated the D-Bag Karen and he hated me so badly because of some comments that I said to him in our last conversations, like, "It seems sad that an engineer like me knows the law better than you who's a lawyer," or "Such a shame my tenant didn't sue you, you almost had a case to defend." Last year, I adopted a puppy, which I'll call Cookie for the story, since one of the 3 parks in our community is in front of my house crossing the street that I train Cookie to go park, go pee, and go home. We usually do that 3 times a day and play catch 10 to 20 minutes each time. I have to mention, she is a very muscular 60-pound dog, mixed pit bull with something, but she's never bitten or acted aggressive in her life. 3 months ago, a lady I'll call Karen was walking by with her 2 children, about 5 to 7 years old, and probably was thinking about going to the park where I was walking towards with Cookie, and she started screaming about why I had a dog without a leash. Since Cookie didn't know them and they weren't in the park, she just ignored them and kept walking. But, oh boy, Karen was mad. She stayed in the entrance of the park in front of her children, waiting for me to put a leash on Cookie, which I ignored. And then she said that it was just a rule here, and I said, "Oh good, so what?" And then D-Bag appears, and it seems he is Karen's husband, makes sense now, and started saying it was a rule that all dogs must have a leash at all times. I just ignored him, saying things like, "Oh good, cool, whatever, don't care." But after they started to scream, I decided not to play catch with Cookie and told her to go home. After that, D-Bag said, "It would be a shame if a car hit your dog because it wasn't on a leash," which I answered saying, "There's a speed limit here, and I don't think anyone would hit my dog on purpose other than you." And then I followed Cookie home. Finally, for the climax. Last week, I was parking with Cookie and 2 other dogs in the car that I was planning to take that weekend. They were in the back seat in front of the park at the other side of the street where my house is. They were just taking a bath in the vet. Then I opened the door and Cookie ran to the park, both excited to play with the other 2 dogs and because she badly needed to go pee and didn't need to wait for me, since she was already on the other side of the street. And then I start hearing Karen shouts, the leash, put a leash on it." Then I see it's Karen and her 2 sons in the park again. I didn't see them before, and since the sprinklers were on in half of the park, I didn't think there would be people there. I just wasn't going to play and just let them pee and go home. So I grabbed the other 2 dogs and walked to the entrance of the park. And of course, since Karen and their children were in the park already, Cookie was upside down waiting for a belly rub. So we meet them next to the Karen who was in front of her children, like protecting them from a wild coyote, and then I said, "Cookie, go pee." And Cookie stands and goes to pee on the other side of the park, closer to the sprinklers. I was thinking I was lucky. It was only one of 2 idiots, but I guess I wasn't that lucky because 5 seconds later, D-Bag stands 2 feet in front of my face, and this exchange started. "How many times have I told you? You can't have a dog without a leash here." So I reply back, "So far, 2 times. "There have been plenty of times." It's not like that I'm keeping count. All this was happening with 2 kids with confused faces, a mad red-faced Karen, and Cookie peeing in the background. I was very ticked now, and the exchange continued. "It is in the rules. Just follow them," D-Bag says. I reply, "Why would I follow any rules you established when you don't even follow them yourself? If you don't like seeing my dog without a leash," and I lost myself here, "there are 2 other parks closer to your house, so screw off." Then I grabbed Cookie by her collar because she wasn't going home without using the bathroom, but didn't feel like waiting for it, and I walked with all 3 dogs to my house, saying to Cookie in a loud voice, "It seems they only come to this park just to annoy us, Cookie. Let's see how long it takes for their next appearance." We never had a rule about leashes in our community, and we haven't updated the rules yet since we haven't had any HOA meetings for it, so if it's in the rules now, it wasn't approved by the community. Housing Association wants me to pay my late auntie's debt? No, pay me the money I overpaid instead. Posted by Joshi. Before I lived in my current place, I was living with my auntie. She was the main tenant who sorted the bills, and I would pay her a lump sum each month as board payments. In early 2021, she passed away unexpectedly. Naturally, I didn't want to continue living in this place. Bad memories and bearing the responsibility for an entire place alone wasn't feasible for me financially at the time. After speaking with the Housing Association, I was informed the only way to end the tenancy would be by getting the tenancy agreement moved over into my name before terminating the tenancy when I was ready to move out. What I didn't know at this point was that my auntie was in arrears on the rent payment. When it came to the point of leaving the tenancy, I had money in savings and just settled up the rent entirely by paying about £500 of my auntie's arrears on top of the rent that I personally owed from living there alone. I then stayed at the place for a few more weeks before closing the tenancy. In hindsight, I probably should have queried the payment, but at that point, I just wanted rid of the place. After moving into my new place, I was getting pestered by the Housing Association, who said I still owed £300 on the previous house. There was a lot of back and forth before I then asked for a copy of the rent statement. It was around this time that I was speaking to people about this money I supposedly owed. I was informed that I probably shouldn't be liable for my auntie's debt, as I didn't receive the estate and was not the next of kin. However, there was an argument to be made that I was liable for the debt, as technically my name was on the agreement and I became the main tenant. With this information in mind, I looked at the rent statement, worked out how much money I'd owed from the first week after my auntie had passed, and deducted it from my total rent payments made after that point. And it turned out I had paid £200 extra, assuming I wasn't liable for the debt. I presented all my working out in a thorough email and I sent it over. I didn't hear anything back from them after that, conveniently, and assumed it was all over. I decided to not pursue this as I was sick of being pestered by them, and I wasn't 100% sure if I was or wasn't liable for this money. Fast forward nearly 2 years, I received a letter last month, just before Christmas, stating that I still owed this £300 and it would be sent to debt collectors if nothing was done. At this point, I was ticked off. I spoke to someone who was able to tell me for sure that I am not liable for the debt in this particular situation. So I sent a firmly written email detailing how I don't owe this money, but in fact, they owed me, provided all the evidence, and threatened small claims if the situation wasn't rectified soon. It took weeks of me pestering them via phone calls and emails for me to be able to get in contact with a lovely woman who apologized on behalf of the company on how I was treated. She then got the ball rolling, and eventually my £200 refund cleared the other day. This was a particularly satisfying end, because if they would have just left it, I wouldn't have chased it up, and they would be £200 better off. What a shame. I was fired for inadvertently stumbling on my boss's malfeasance. I used his obsession with golf and watches to get him fired. Posted by Call Me Swellington. This was in the last throes of the analog mid-90s. Fax machines, FedEx, and dial-up computing and voicemail were the most common business tools. I was a young regional sales manager for a major branded consumer product. I covered the grocery class of trade in 11 western states. My division worked out of Chicago, and I had a home office on the West Coast. I had made my reputation by typically making my quota and keeping costs within budget. I would get reassigned to struggling markets, and more often than not, I would usually make my sales number. Nothing too fancy, I just figured where the best opportunities were and concentrated on them. In those days, we had something called Market Development Funds, MDF, or as we called it, Making Days Fun. In the time before such things were deemed illegal, it was money that we could literally use for almost anything you could imagine. Wining and dining, sending buyers to the Super Bowl, taking them on Market research trips. I once took 6 honchos for a weekend of fishing in Mexico. As long as you had the receipts and your boss knew, except in cases where they specifically asked not to know, we were free to spend money as we saw fit. This was old school Mad Men style slush funds, all tax deductible. Typically, the MDF money was 2% of your total annual gross sales and was use it or lose it, meaning it had to be spent because it wouldn't roll over. I always had some left over, and as a team player, I would let my boss, Sasquatch, know so he could use it. No big deal. Towards the end of the year, my weekly FedEx pack from the company started including sign-offs for payments to a supplier that I've never heard of before. What was weird is that they were for a demo company that wasn't one of my regional suppliers. If you've ever been offered a sample or a coupon in a grocery store, that was a demo company. I called the broker and agent in that market, and I learned that they had never used the company or even heard of them. I finally figured out that they were from Sasquatch and that he had thrown them in with my other sign-offs. I called him and asked if he knew what they were, and he said that they should be assigned to my MDF and not to worry about them. This was a little unusual because the demos would normally be taken out of other monies or come down from marketing. Whatever, I signed off on them. Hung out to dry. About 3 months later, I was called into HQ for a meeting where I was told that I was being transferred to a market that I'd never worked before and would be required to relocate. At the time, my wife was pregnant, and we had just started an extensive remodel in our newly purchased house. The company had some relocation benefits, but it was just too hectic to pull up roots and move to the southeast. I declined the offer and was told that I could look for another job within the company or receive a severance package. I wound up taking the severance. The truth comes to light. Several months later, one of my ex-coworkers told me that my region had been taken over by one of Sasquatch's past work associates who he had managed to get hired in my spot, and that the region was tanking badly. Nothing made sense. Why was I terminated and then replaced by someone who lived in another city and who couldn't do the job? I started to think in my naivety that I may have put a target on my back. After some research and digging, which was much harder before the internet, I learned that the demo company billing the MDF was based in my ex-boss's previous city and was just a P.O. box, a telephone, and a DBA registered by the new person in my job, and I later found out that it was his girlfriend and mistress. I was livid. Like most people, I tend to plan revenge in my head, but never really go through with it. Most of the time, it's a coping mechanism and not very useful in moving on past being wronged. But this was so egregious, so uncalled for, and so disruptive to my life that I felt I had to get even. My plan evolved to take this guy down, whatever the time it took, whatever the cost in lives or money. I was going to get this mofo. I may have been able to rat him out to the company, but they might have dismissed my complaint as coming from a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. The hook. I decided that I was going to approach the guy as a phony recruiter, not just a guy collecting resume, but as a retained corporate headhunter, someone paid to onboard people for big jobs. I had spent a year early in my career working for a super exclusive headhunting firm, and I knew exactly what transpired in the process. My subterfuge required international telexes, phony letterhead, faked English accents, and overseas friends to do my bidding. Sasquatch was obsessed with expensive watches and golf. He played regularly and watched pro golf both on TV and live. He would incessantly chatter on about both subjects. To bait him, I arranged for him to be approached for an executive position with a major Swiss watch company for a position tied to pro golf and other swanky sports for sponsorships, and included a shopping list of benefits and prerequisites. The job would require hobnobbing with major sports organizers, flying around the world, first class, and basically spending money. It was a job he could only dream of. The setup. In the slow and methodical long con, I strung him along until the time was right to close with an offer. The only catch was that he had to report to Switzerland for the final offer and onboarding. I deliberately scheduled it for the week of the old jobs division meetings and reporting. They were mandatory and impossible to miss without raising red flags. Sasquatch was worried that his absence would be impossible to cover, especially if he was out of the country. The headhunting firm said that they could move the appointment up a few days so that he would be able to attend the meeting, but that he would need to purchase an unrestricted business class seat and make his own hotel reservations. Save your receipts and the watch company will reimburse you, he was told. Sasquatch showed up to his swanky hotel suite using his own credit card for the high-dollar room and promptly received a note from the watch company that his appointment had to be rescheduled for the following Monday because of a major corporate crisis. Sasquatch called the phony recruiter in a panic about missing the corporate meetings back in the States. It was agreed that he would call in sick and that whatever happened with the old job, he was heading to much greener fairways. Enjoy your weekend in Europe. By Monday, you'll be in your dream job. The Sting. While Sasquatch was cooling his jets in Europe, I nonchalantly called his boss, the president of the division, and casually asked for a reference on Sasquatch's work ethic and dates of employment. You'd be surprised how often this mistake happens. The president, to his credit, didn't tip his hand or act very surprised by the call, but like a good corporate wonk, he referred me to human resources. I let it slip that he was in Europe finalizing his new job and that he'd already given the company notice. My bad. The bloody aftermath and how the Revenge overstepped its original mission. Eventually, I was able to put together the aftermath from old coworkers and other people in the trade who did not know I was the Revenge Ninja. When Monday came and went, Sasquatch must have been apoplectic. This is assumed since we had cut all communications to let him twist in the wind, because we received at least 20 calls to the exchange and multiple faxes. Sasquatch hung around the hotel for a day or two and then finally decided to leave for home. I assume at some point he may have contacted the watch company, but I never confirmed it. When he finally got home, he found his office had been packed up and left with his wife. An HR person met him off-site to give him his severance and retrieve his car and other company property. I heard his wife left him sometime later and his mistress was fired for theft. I figure he spent at least $10,000 on travel and hotel. Epilogue. I wish that I could say that I tipped my hand and told Sasquatch that I was the author of his demise, but it really served no purpose and in theory may have exposed me to some retribution of my own. By my moral lodestar, I got even with a thief who was content to steal and take my livelihood. And that was plenty. You fired your 5-person team and blamed it on IT, so I made your job redundant, posted by the Lightning Count 1. So at my job there was a small team of 6, 5 workers and a VP who literally only was a VP for those 5 people. Go figure. Their job in its entirety was to monitor all sources of contact with support teams, evaluate the contact, and report negative customer satisfaction ratings to the relevant supervisors and the CIO. In layman's terms, they collected all data regarding bad calls or chats or tickets with all support teams and sent the information to the managerial staff for each department. They did not listen to phone calls. They did not read chat logs. They simply picked the negatives and sent them out to everyone. For those of you scratching your head thinking, a script can do that. Well, a script was made to do that. By me after the last major fiasco involving the support team reporting. There was an EVP who left long ago who hated me, who did not like the thought of me handling this issue all on my own, so she hired 6 people. Well, over the last year, my company has been closing loopholes. No personal equipment, no outdated Windows versions, no working outside secured systems. This created a paradigm shift for this small team. They continuously contacted IT to help them get in compliance, then get them up and running on the new systems. Of course, since these were stubborn, irrational workers, these ladies refused to follow compliance fully and kept trying to figure out ways to game the system. Those in the know will understand that this means that they contact IT with problems that do not exist. They would contact us wanting things to work in unsecure ways and demand that we fix the problem. This created a sort of battle of the departments in the company where anytime we would request something, they would fight for it for budgetary reasons. Anytime they would request something, we did nothing. In essence, we employed the Space Wolves strategy. This came to a head at the last department head meeting. My VP asked me to go in his stead, and he would be on Zoom listening in case he needed to approve or deny something. Different departments do their thing, go about their room detailing changes in terms, additions and subtractions to the budgets, and finally just rounding out this, mostly useless meeting with praise to the company. Then, it's her turn. Karen, we shall call her. Karen was sitting there with this fake somber expression and looking absolutely dejected as she started off her report detailing the loss of her entire department. The way she described it was like reading an obituary. The conversation following is mostly accurate. Karen said, "So, in essence, the main reason why I was forced to let them go was because we could not justify their salary requirements any longer." EVP of Marketing says, "Why is that?" "See, the amount of IT troubles the department has been having recently has forced them to slow down their work. Over the last 4 months, a total of 48 IT troubleshooting contacts have come from my team to IT. Each time IT refused to help and forced them to use their methods." My boss on Zoom had an incredulous look on his face, and I was just giving her a cockeyed expression of disbelief. At this moment, I am doing the job of the entire 6-person staff by myself, as feelers are being put out there for new hires. Unfortunately, the rampant IT issues we are having forces me to hold off on any new employees until these are fixed." Teams message pops up. Didn't you make a script for exactly her job?" Light bulb moment, and I had to force myself not to smile wide. I sent off a message to my boss. "I got this. I so got this." And I linked him to the script. He looked it over, and I could see the gears turning as he realized the script for what it was. So, it's a script that does her job. She still made the darning accusations for the IT group. He was more concerned about what she said. I was more concerned about removing a thorn in my side. I have the answer for that, but it won't be needed. Karen finished her diatribe, and all eyes looked at me. So I would like to start off with my proposal that I was going to save for the end. However, Karen has seen fit to necessitate its urgency more. I completely avoided the issue Karen brought up and started right off the bat. I was going to suggest augmenting her team's function with the script that was created by the IT team and approved by the CISO a year ago. For some reason, there was pressure to block the script and implement Karen's team instead, which Karen has just informed us has been let go from our company. Karen got this strange look like she was not exactly sure what was happening. "So, what does the script do?" the CIO said. I say, it parses the CSAT logs, grabs all the negative or neutral CSATs, and emails the relevant supervisor or manager with the data. Ever have those moments when everyone in the room knows that you just suggested something kind of evil, yet they also kind of want this to happen? That was the faces of half of the people there. The other half did not care, and one was really scared. I said, "I'll go ahead and run it now." 2 minutes go by, and a lot of Outlook pings start popping off in the conference room. "You should all be getting email notifications with your CSAT numbers." I waited 10 seconds before adding in, "Oh yeah, this script actually significantly expands on the functions provided by Karen's team. It also tells you your percentages for positive versus negative ratings, average time spent on an issue, if there were any major outages. It precludes all CSATs related to the outages, as those are almost universally negative, and the support teams involved have no resolution during outages, as it's vendor responsibility." CIO says, "What else were you going to discuss in the meeting before Karen's notes prompted this response?" I say, "Oh, it's mostly irrelevant now. Several contacts that come into IT are about non-issues. These are people wanting to circumvent the security policies so they can go back to the easier way of doing things. However, the vast majority of these contacts have come from Karen's team. Since they are no longer employees of our company, it is irrelevant data." 3 days later, her department is shuttered. She tried to get on under other departments. However, over the last year, she has used her position to bring herself up by bringing others down. So, everyone hated her and no one wanted her. She was let go today with a significantly reduced severance package. HOA board takedown. HOA president destroys property not in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you find out what happens to the president, and I'll see you there.